Hey Untold Radio Network fans, want exclusive perks and to support our channel? Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Good evening, all my fellow weirdos and weirdettes. Thank you for joining me on the Untold Radio Network for Talking Weird. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and tonight, I'm always sad of this night. It's the final night of July, and it always makes me think my summer is slipping on by. So thank you for joining me on this final July night. I hope everybody's enjoying their summer. It's been a wonderful one here in the Northwoods, although it's been a little hot, but that is what we expect from summer, and at least I don't have to suffer the snow, which I'm still getting used to being new-ish in Wisconsin. I'm super excited to talk about tonight's guest, however. I've only recently discovered his books. He's an historian, a philosopher, an antiquarian, a jurist, a lay theologian, a writer, mystic, radio TV personality, showman, best-selling author, CEO, and lawyer. And he's the author of 5 books, The Royal Arch of Enoch, Cinema Symbolism 1, 2, and 3, and A Pact with the Devil. The latter is a work of fiction. He's also a Freemason of Amicable-St John's Lodge, number 25, and a 32nd degree of the Scottish Rite, Valley of Baltimore, Orient of Maryland. Anyway, I am absolutely delighted to welcome to Talking Weird for the first time ever, although I hope it won't be the last because I've got so much to talk to him about, and that's Robert W. Sullivan IV. Greetings.
Dean. Greetings. Yeah, thank you for having me on Talking Weird. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I only recently discovered your books, to be honest. It was thanks to the recommendation of Mark Eddy, who's a good friend of the show. And I haven't read them all because I only booked you somewhat recently. I have to have you back on because tonight we're not even going to get through one of them, let alone all of them. They're absolutely fascinating. Could you just give an overview, I guess, for the audience who aren't familiar with? Let's start with what we'll mainly be talking about tonight, and that's the cinema of symbolism. How did you find out about these type of, I suppose, buried messages and narratives and occult castings and symbolism and all these things which are just embedded in the films that we watch?
Right. I mean, for me, it actually goes back to my childhood with the movie Star Wars. I was born in 1971, so this was a movie that I grew up on. And when it came out, I mean, it was like the big hit, and of course, it enthralled me. And as a boy, I had the toys and the Death Star and all that stuff. But as years later, when I was in high school, I came to find out that this movie, and this is episode 4 and 5 and 6 that I'm talking about right now, were essentially rebrandings of ancient mythology. And this has been, this isn't any state secret or anything. Lucas openly admits this, that one of the major influences on Star Wars, this, huge space opera, is ancient mythology. And he talks about this book by Joseph Campbell called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and how this hero, this solar archetypal hero, has certain things that happen to him on this grand adventure that he always goes on. That this hero goes on ultimately to defeat some dark evil overlord of some sort. And if you become familiar with the components of this thing, they stand out like a sore thumb in Star Wars. And of course, when you become aware of them, you will find them in other cinema and stories as well. And especially in stories where you generally have a hero going up against some, evil type of tyrant of some kind. So, these things, these elements of the hero's journey, you'll find them in Dune by Frank Herbert. You will find them in The Matrix, certainly The Lord of the Rings. These all overlap. And that was really, to me, the introduction to this, how they were essentially, Harry Potter's another one, where these ancient mythologies and themes were being incorporated, were being resurrected into modern times by Hollywood. And of course, this was just the tip of the iceberg. There are these other, as you said at the intro, these occult themes and esoteric ideas and philosophies that just permeate modern cinema. I mean, and you can find it in movies, you can find it in TV shows, you can find it in music. It's a very vast study, and it's a very interesting study, at least from my point of view.
Yeah, it's interesting because somebody myself who's interested in cinema and has made film and runs film festivals, I'm always conscious of Campbell's influence. But in many ways, I've always just assumed that that's because, okay, script writing handbook said, here's a good way to tell a story. Do you know what I mean? Let's embed this type of mythical cycle in there, and it resonates at all types of levels, and it'll make you a good selling script. But as you mentioned then, it goes far deeper than just what can perhaps be explained as some type of 3-act structure or mechanism people are following. There are these things that, unless you were probably fairly well adversed in the occult sciences, as obviously you are, that you would miss if you weren't paying attention. Things that are hitting almost at a subliminal level. And that's harder maybe to explain.
No, you're absolutely correct. There is a lot of absolutely. You have to be well invested and well read on the occult sciences, alchemy, Gnosticism. Those are just a couple, but yeah, any numerology, gematria. There is a plethora of techniques that these filmmakers use to convey esoteric ideas. And one of the things that that I talk about is someone like me who can identify them, and that's of course one of the reasons why I wrote the books. But to the person who isn't as well versed in them, it still affects them because they target the subconscious mind. So you pick up on them, but not consciously. Now I can pick up on them consciously, but these very latent themes of alchemy, mysticism, numbers is another one, and it's not just an eye in a triangle hanging on the background of a wall. I mean, these guys are really masters of this stuff. I mean, we're talking about costuming, the music, the setting, and as you mentioned, this thing that I call occult casting, although of late that's a term someone I kind of have moved away from, although I don't have a problem with it. It's really more of an art of memory technique coming out of the world of people like Giordano Bruno and things like that, where a specific actor or actress is meant to trigger some sort of past movie and sort of carry forward the baggage from that movie and place it in it's not really subliminal, it's more subconscious, but it's very effective when it's done properly. So no, these guys paint with a very wide palette. And again, it's a very vast study because I've been doing this for years now, and even now I find myself still learning about this. It can be boiled down to, another thing to pay attention to is the dates when these films are released. That can have meaning. So yeah, it's a very vast and broad study. And when you think you've cracked it all, something new will pop up and just blow you away.
There's so much even to unpack just in that, but let's hit the dates to begin with, because that's what we ended on. Can you talk about some dates regarding releasing films, and maybe 9/11 is as good enough a place to start as any?
Right. Well, when I talk about releasing dates, I'm talking about like when a movie is actually released on a date. So for example, in that has nothing to do with 9/11. So example, like the Elvis movie that came out last year, the Buzz Ehrman movie, that was released on June 24th. That's Midsommar. That's when the sun is at the strength, is at its high watermark in the northern hemisphere. And if you're familiar with my research, Elvis, his whole life personifies the sun. So to release the movie on the date of Midsommar was very fascinating. And another one that comes to mind is The Omen, The Final Conflict. That was released on the vernal equinox of, I believe, 1981. And that has meaning because that's, of course, when the sun, Christ, is resurrected from the 3-month vault of winter and darkness is defeated. And, of course, if you're familiar with the Omen trilogy, this is the movie where Damien Thorne, Darkness, the Antichrist, is finally defeated. So those dates have very occult, are very highly valuable in the occult, and, of course, are synced perfectly for the releases of those movies. The 9/11 material is something totally different. The 9/11 material is something that I'm analyzing, and this is a study that I'm continuing on with right now for Cinema Symbolism 4. The 9/11 material is imagery popping up in pop culture that foreshadows the event horizon of 9/11, whether it be The Simpsons or Fight Club or The Matrix. There is this huge daisy chain of events that go back many years. And at first I thought that this was that the further back you went, it was more tenuous. No, you can find stuff going back that seems to be pointing to this. I have to say something. I don't want to go too off topic on this. My take on 9/11 and what is going on with this has shifted drastically over the last 3 months. With some research I've been doing, which is not in any of my books. It's something that's going to be appearing in Cinema Symbolism 4. But my take on this is somewhat altered a little bit. But to stick with what you're asking me, yes, there are these images that are appearing in pop culture that definitely seem to foreshadow 9/11, whether it be the Simpsons episode, where he waves the money in front of the magazine that has 9/11 on it, featuring the Twin Towers. In The Matrix, which is a movie about the end of the old age, the awakening to consciousness. Neo's passport expires on 9/11/01. You have the destruction of the sphere sculpture in Fight Club, and of course you have the downing of the two buildings, the financial buildings at the end, which, by the way, Tyler Durden calls Ground Zero. The sphere, the circular sculpture, is very, very, very interesting in the 9/11 mythology. It gets badly damaged. It's subsequently been moved, but that turns up in something else that's interesting. But I don't want to talk about that right now. But no, you will definitely find this pre-11, pre-9/11 imagery. One of the most fascinating ones. I was sharing this with someone else, and this was something that I just picked up on, and this goes back to September 11th, 1977. And the number 77 is interesting in all this, but again, we don't have time for that. On 9/11/77 saw the release of the Atari 2600 video game system on 9/11. And if you think back to that, I mean, this, may sound kind of silly, but, what are you talking about? If you remember this, and again, this was when it was released, it was on 9/11/77. The game came with the gaming system came with a game called Combat, where you played as a tank or as a jet fighter. And of course, the word combat in Arabic means jihad. And believe it or not, the word Atari comes from the Japanese word Ataru, which means strike or destroy the target. So I find that very interesting. I mean, that's going all the way back to 77. So this is sort of some of the stuff I'm talking about with the pre-9/11 imagery.
And I think you point out, and why I mentioned 9/11 is I think Fight Club was released almost 2 years to the day before 9/11, right? Like, was it the 9/10 or something? I think it was released, like 1999.
Yeah. This is correct. As you get actually close to 9/11, some of this material starts becoming much more frequent. That's one of the things that's also very disturbing about is the closer you get, the more frequency. You have a higher rate of frequency of seeing it. And not only that, some of it syncs with the actual 9/11 date. Fight Club being one of them. And I think you mentioned it right. Fight Club is released almost 2 years to the day before 9/11. And then you go back in time 2 more years. The Simpson episode also syncs with that. And that's something else to look at, which is very important with this. And again, this is something that I'm beginning to investigate now, is the date sequencing. Because this is something that, again, when I first started examining this, I thought was very rare or isolated. It is not. It is actually quite astounding some of the date sequencing and the time stamping on some of these events. It is my opinion has changed on this again substantially in the last 3 months, and I've come to believe that this is some sort of massive. You remember the movie the movie from 1984 Ghostbusters, when one of them, I think it's the Dan Aykroyd character, he says to one of them, he says, this is like the greatest supernatural event since the Tunguska blast of 1909 or whatever it is, this cross-dimensional rift or whatever he calls it. That's almost where I'm at with 9/11. This was some sort of cross-dimensional rift coming from the supernatural world that is inexplicable when you start applying the number sequencing to this thing. And this is what I've been working on for the last 3 or 4 months. It's so mind-blowing that it's really astounding. I'll just leave it at that.
I wonder if that might, in a way, be a key to a lot of this, because while I don't doubt some of the occult subliminal messages are probably very intentional, I often wonder how involved every element of a production team can be in pushing forward this type of messaging. And I wonder if somehow this isn't reflecting some type of broader spiritual stream washing through humanity, or washing through our culture. Because you mentioned quite interestingly in the introduction to volume 3 of Cinema Symbolism that you don't actually think there's some satanic New World Order Illuminati kind of conspiracy trying to change things necessarily by doing this, but you still recognize that there's a potent force there. And I've certainly, as I'm sure you have heard the idea that some of this is predictive programming, or some of this is revelation of the method, that they have to show us first what they're going to do. And I've certainly heard things like that around 9/11. Another great example, of course, is the Lone Gunman episode, which is the X-Files spin-off, where the towers are threatened by a remote control jet going to fly into them. And that was very shortly before the event as well. So to people who might look at this conspiratorially, it almost seems like they're saying, aha, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, the idea, there's a couple ways to look at this. You can look at with movies that there is an element. You go back to the works of Plato, and he says creativity is a divine force, and I kind of tie this into what Carl Jung talked about with the idea of the collective unconscious, that it's inherited but also is a predictive, and is the creative impetus somehow becoming a predictive mechanism of some kind. The idea that there is some sinister force in this world that is plotting this out, there is some truth to that. I mean, I do acknowledge that the CIA has planted things in movies to foreshadow things and stuff like that, and there is definitely an agency involvement with this to an extent. I can tell you almost without, as a lawyer, with 100% certainty that a lot of this material I am now convinced is supernatural, because I don't see how a group of human beings could be capable of such a thing. I'm not talking about death and mayhem or anything like that, but just with the number sequencing, that I don't see how. This strikes me being beyond the realm of a human being. That's kind of where I'm at with this right now. And again, this goes back about 3 or 4 months with some research that I've been doing onto this. But I do acknowledge. I mean, there is just too much going on that I'm with you 100%. I don't believe it's a coincidence, but I just don't see that there is a human being, that this can be a product of, maybe there's a synthesis of some kind where there could be a conspiracy and something like that. Like, was Kennedy killed by a CIA, conspiracy? Yeah, I'll buy that. But there's a supernatural force at work here that is either synthesizing with this or is taking it over somehow. That's kind of where I'm at right now with a lot of this research. But I don't dispute the fact that in my opinion, the more satanic and sinister elements, to me, are emerging from the world of the supernatural than they are of the world of humankind. I'm with you. I believe they're there. I just see it more as supernatural. That's my take on it.
There was one thing I found staggering, which is probably less conspiratorial, but just the incredible coincidence. And maybe you can tell the story a little more in detail. I'll just like shoot a bolt to jog your memory of what I'm talking about. And that's the example of that, I believe, Korean woman who was in the elevator with the strange footage, and the way that her death ties in with, I think it was the film the horror film Dark Waters, I think it was called.
Yeah, that's an absolutely true story. Is Elisa Lam, who went up missing in this hotel, this very has a bleak history with it, called the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles. Excuse me, yeah, it is in Los Angeles. It's in Hollywood, and she went missing. And there's video footage of her, and it looks like she's being stalked by a ghost. Anyway, her body wound up being found in a water tank on top of the roof, and it's very suspect as how she got up there, how she got into the tank. I mean, but she was found drowned, and this was all prophesized by a movie called Dark Water that came out years earlier. The Cecil Hotel has some very bad history with it. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, used to hang around there, and the Black Dahlia used to hang around at its bar. And of course, she was, very strangely murdered in almost a ritual murder of some kind. So this place has a very dark history. But yeah, I mean, this is again another great example of how cinema seems to be prophetic and predicting things, or it's like art foreshadowing life, as it were. It seems to work both ways. This isn't the only example, but it's a very good example. I talk about that in Cinema Symbolism 3. The 3 Mile Island event, 2 weeks I think before it happened, it might have even been shorter than that, came the movie The China Syndrome, which was about a nuclear reactor melting down. So that's another great example. The other one that's very, very peculiar is this one has just come full circle. Was in I believe around the late 19th century, maybe around 1900, there was a book written called The Wreck of the Titan that prophesied the sinking of the Titanic. And look at the names, Titan, Titanic, and if you read it, the measurements of the ship are all but the same. There's the death of the people because there wasn't enough lifeboats. Very, very symbolic, very, very, very parallel. And then, of course, you just had this little rover thing going down to the Titanic, which imploded, called what else but the Titan. So this seems to have just come full circle. So yeah, very, very, but like something like that to me seems to be more supernatural than a human hand behind it.
Well, the woman, Elisa Lam, I think you said her name wasn't there afterwards too? And this is a thing that really struck me. I think there was some big TB outbreak in the area, and then the test, which the World Health Organization, or whoever it was, uses to test for TB is actually called LAM, capital like Lam Elisa or something. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, there was a tuberculosis outbreak right after her death around the hotel, and the name of the kit used to test for tuberculosis is like Lam Elisa. It's something like that. Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, what are the odds, as it were? But to me, this to me is coming more. I mean, I agree with you that it's documented. I don't believe it's a coincidence. It's either a product of a human hand or something supernatural, or perhaps a synthesis of both. That's kind of where I am with my research right now. But it's very peculiar, to say the least.
It almost makes me think of like Neoplatonic ideas about the world of forms and how our world is the reflection of a more perfect world, perhaps above us at another level. You almost wonder if our culture isn't somehow a part of another frame, which is framing our reality, which might be framing another reality. Like there might almost be a level of a super reality above us, and somehow that, I mean, that's just really an allegory, but somehow that bleeds into us and hits us at different times, because it seems to be, I can't get my head around some of it in any working, as you said, just human mechanism. It seems like there seems to be some synchronistic force above and beyond just people, intentionally manipulating storylines or something.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I think that there is, like, for example, one of the things that I'm looking into is the Kennedy assassination, because this whole thing was predicted on a TV show called Route 66. I mean, the whole thing was predicted beforehand on this early 1960s television show called Route 66, which I'll be delving into in my new book. But then there's that. But then there's this other supernatural element coming into this, and it regards numbers and things like that that just can't be manipulated by a human hand. It's the only way I can describe it. I have a lot of examples of this. I'll say this to the audience and to you, and I'll leave it. I mean, I don't mind talking about it, but I kind of am holding back on this a little bit, and there's a reason why. Is on Tuesday, August 1st, I'm going to be posting a blog post on my website. It's going to be in the blog post, and it's going to be the preface of my new book called Cinema Symbolism 4. And I invite people to go check this out, because this is going to be some of the stuff of what this new book is going to be going into. And I think that when people read this, they're going to be blown away by it, because I know I've been blown away by it. And it's actually, and I say this to you, Dean, it's actually, for the first time in my life, when I see this stuff, I'm actually disturbed by it. I mean, when I mean by disturbed by it, I mean it's taken me back a little bit. I mean, I've been doing this research now for over 20 years. I mean, going on 30 years. I mean, if you go back to my time in England, and in 30 years of looking at this stuff, there's not much that makes me sit up in my chair and make me say, "Oh my God, what is this?" This stuff does, and did, and is still doing it. And it really, to me, I think, answers this. I mean, I think it puts to rest this, of what's going on, and it, answers a lot of questions about the supernatural force. Where's it coming from? How's it coming? It's only the preface. There will be more coming in the book. But I invite people to come check that out on August the 1st. I should have it up. Like I said, there's even a part of me that's even a little reluctant to put it up. But it'll give some people, I think, a roadmap of sort of where I've been going with this over the last 4, 5, 6 months, preparing Cinema Symbolism 4, because my opinion has somewhat altered on this a little bit. I still stand by what I say in my earlier books. I mean, I do believe there's conspiracies in this world. I mean, do I believe there's this satanic force in Hollywood? I mean, there could be, but like I said, the stuff that I believe I'm documenting right now, to me, just smacks of the supernatural. And it's dark. I mean, I don't dispute that. I mean, I think it's a dark supernatural force, but it doesn't strike me as something that a human being or a cabal of human beings could produce. And I'll just leave it at that.
I'm looking forward to going and checking out your site on August 1st. I'll be one of the first people prowling there looking for it. While we're talking about potentially people who do understand and put messaging in purpose, let's talk about a little bit about the occult world of Ian Fleming. Could you fill our viewers in and listeners in on that?
Yeah, this is just a great example of some of the stuff we're talking about here. And there's always been this sort of pervasive thought that the occult and mysticism is somewhat reserved for the dregs of humanity. Nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, this is something that fascinates the royal houses, the hierarchy, as it were. This is high-end material. Usually not even, it can't even be understood by, what these people would call the lower classes, as it were. And I mean, Fleming was part of this. I mean, he was in World War II. I mean, he worked in British intelligence. And of course, he went on to produce the James Bond novels, which are filled with all sorts of ideas relating to the world of Hermeticism, alchemy, Rosicrucianism. James Bond 007, that comes from Queen Elizabeth's court astrologer and mystic, a guy named Dr. John Dee, who was a spy master. And when he went to the Holy Roman Empire to attempt to undermine it as a spy, he would send back correspondences to Queen Bess, and he would sign it 007. And of course, the signature was meant to look like eyeglasses, meaning there's 2 zeros and then a line over it, then a line down it. And it was meant to look like spy glasses, meaning the communication was for her as only, he was her eyes in the field. And of course, these are terms still used today by the CIA and MI6 and things like that. I mean, you have, an alchemical theme in Goldfinger where he's trying to transmute the gold by making it worthless with the nuclear dirty device, the nuclear device, which would, of course, would be the Philosopher's Stone. By devaluing the gold in Fort Knox, his gold becomes worth more money. So that's an alchemical theme. Of course, Crowley, one of the people that he oversaw during World War II was none other than Aleister Crowley, who I can tell you right now is the key to unlocking a lot of what is going on in this reality right now. That may come as, people may sit back and think, oh, come on, what's this guy Sullivan talking about? I am telling you right now, this guy is the key to unlocking so much of this material, and even as to what is going on in the world today. But of course, Crowley turns up a couple of times in Fleming's novel. He's Blofeld, the guy who runs Spectre. In the James Bond story, it's really Blofeld in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, because if you remember that, this is the movie where Telly Savalas played Blofeld. If you remember in that movie, Blofeld was trying to hold himself out as French nobility. He was running around calling himself the Viscount of Blowshaw, which was this high French nobility title that he was trying to lay claim to. And this was Fleming taking what Crowley was doing. Crowley routinely was holding himself out as Scottish nobility when he wasn't. When he was in Egypt or whatever, he was always holding himself to be Scottish nobility. He ran around calling himself Lord Boleskine. So the idea of Blofeld pretending to be nobility comes straight from Crowley. And then the other instance of Crowley, in Fleming's work is Casino Royale, which is Le Chiffre, the cipher. If you remember in that, the villain uses of the air inhaler for his asthma, and that's a reference to Crowley, because Crowley in later years developed asthma from his drug abuse. So the cipher from Casino Royale is Aleister Crowley also. What makes that very interesting, and this is somewhat of a black magic sync, as it were, is if you recall in the one with Daniel Craig, this is the one where Ava Green played Vesper Lind. This came out around 06, 07, somewhere in there. This is the first Daniel Craig Bond movie. If you remember, I'm not gonna get too far into this. There was never a Bond movie with Connery or Moore with Casino Royale. There's a reason for that. I'm not going to get into it. It's all long and dragged out. But the reason was the movie was actually, the rights were actually owned by somebody else. It wasn't Broccoli and Salzburg, who are, of course, the Aeon, producers, production help. They put out all the Bond movies, all the canon Bond movies. And they weren't able to acquire the rights to this thing till around 2005, 2006. That's why there was never a Connery, Moore, Casino Royale, Bond film. It fell to Daniel Craig. And if you remember, in that movie, of course, this comes after the fact, with the Le Chiffre character, the M character, M, who is played by Judi Dench in that movie, she mentions that she suspects or even knows that Le Chiffre was behind Finance 9/11. That's very interesting because, like I said, Le Chiffre is a Crowley analog, and the other evidence of that is Le Chiffre is a sadomasochist. Remember, if you've ever seen the movie, he tortures James Bond towards the end of it, right before getting killed. And that was what Crowley was into, was also a sadomasochist. So that sadomasochistic, personality trait carries over into Le Chiffre. But M mentions that Le Chiffre was financing 9/11. That's very interesting because if you look into this, and again, I'm not going to go too far off topic. I want to stay on target here. Crowley's influence on 9/11 is astounding. And it's so disturbing. I don't even like talking about it. And this is going to be some of the things in my blog post that I'm going to be putting up on Tuesday, hopefully, unless something happens where it's too many words or something like that. But the Aleister Crowley impact on 9/11, it's not only 9/11, it's so many other things, is just so mind-boggling. I can't even hardly comprehend it myself, and I'll just leave it at that.
Wow. Crowley is an interesting cat, and clearly a very, he even like to say he was the most evil man in the world or something, right? But in this kind of broader Fortean world, I've certainly heard, and I haven't done a whole lot of Crowley research myself, but I've heard him be accused of launching a number of esoteric phenomena. Apparently, he did rituals on the bank of Loch Ness not long before Nessie became a big, cultural thing again. There's talk about him having contacts with what, when he drew in a sketch, was this alien intelligence who very much resembles what gray extraterrestrials are today. So maybe using that as a segue, what do you think about the presentation? I don't know if you've written about it at all or you've thought about it all, but what do you think about the presentation of extraterrestrials in cinema and how that might impact upon our experiences or our beliefs regarding UFOs and ET life?
Yeah, my take on this is a little bit different and maybe a little off kilter. I mean, people say to me, is this evidence of, with the extraterrestrials, is this evidence of, how can I say it? Predicting a future alien invasion. Well, none's come as of at least 2023. The UFO alien phenomenon, when it first starts to hit in the 1950s, this is very symbolic and very significant. I mean, it's something I talked about in the first book. I'm probably going to expand off of it. It's a very good question you pose. The alien invasion movie is actually a allegory of communist Russia and socialism, and it's the fear of the Red Menace is the way this starts out, because the alien invasion movie walks hand in hand with the giant insect movie. And this is what these two movies are hand in glove, because you have the space alien movie where the aliens come down, and you think of something like This Island Earth or The Day the Earth Stood Still, where the space alien always comes from the socialist utopia planet, and he's always upset with the humans. Called the Michael Rennie effect, where the aliens upset, where the aliens upset because the humans, all they want to do is destroy the environment and kill one another. It's adapt to our socialist communist system or else. And of course, because of the Red Menace, you have the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And of course, this is the nuclear toxic, radiation effect that always produces some giant insect, whether it be a praying mantis, or a tarantula, that kind of roams the countryside, causing nothing but, wreaking havoc all over the place. And again, that's the product of the development of nuclear weapons to stave off the Red Menace. I guess one of the most famous ones is, of course, Godzilla, who of course is the lizard that becomes supersized, and this is an allegory for the United States bombing Hiroshima, and Japan at the end of World War II. I mean, Godzilla only attacks Japan. I mean, that's all it seems to want to go after, is wants to destroy Tokyo. That's it. At least in the early movies, it always comes for Tokyo for whatever reason. And again, this is the fear of the United States launching these nuclear weapons against Japan. So the space alien movie, and then it evolves. The space alien movie evolves where the aliens come down, and again, this ties into the Red Menace, where not only are they invading us, but they're taking us over with this red thread. And what they'll start doing is they get rid of the person and then replace them with like a clone of the person who is all in with the communism. Think of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where the regular human is gone, but is all of a sudden replaced with the communist stand-in, as it were, like a fifth column almost. So when you look at the UFO movies and the space alien movies, especially the ones from the 50s, always keep in mind the Cold War in the background, and the proliferation of nuclear weapons, because a lot of times, not always, it's a two-way street. The what's going on in the world, the ethos of a certain time frame will reflect the cinema, and you find that with things like, I mean, for example, if you look at the horror movies of Universal in the early 30s, I mean, those are clearly targeted for a Depression era audience. Then you go into the early 70s, mid 70s, you get movies like The Stepford Wives, Ira Levin, of course, who did Rosemary's Baby, which is a complete reaction to the women's lib movement. So a lot of times what's going on in the world, sometimes will reflect what's going on in the film. Another great example, I'll leave it at this example, is the James Bond film, the James Bond movies. I mean, if you think, with Bond, with the Connery movies and the Roger Moore movies, I mean, it was always Bond against the KGB, or the USSR. In the early 90s, when the Soviet Union fell and ceased to exist, you had the James Bond movie GoldenEye, come out right after this. And of course, this involves the dissolution of the Soviet Union and how you have these rogue cells running around in the former USSR. And you had, I mean, even the opening credits of this, the song "GoldenEye," which is probably one of the most underrated Bond songs done by the late Tina Turner. I mean, the opening sequence is nothing but the fall of the communism and the fall of the Soviet Union. So when the ethos of the society can also reflect in the movie, and vice versa. Interesting study.
Yeah, that stuff fascinates me. To change course a little bit again.
Sure.
You obviously have your handle around or handle on the esoteric and occult elements of cinema, probably more than anybody I've ever spoken to. I know people in the independent film and television world who pretty unabashedly use their art to inject a ritualism into the audience. One example would be John Harrigan, who's a good friend of mine. He made a movie called Light Ships, and he unapologetically does art which is ritualistic and which is meant to evoke something. And another example some of our audience might be more familiar with is the TV series Hellier, made by Greg and Dana Newkirk and Connor Randall and Carl Pfeiffer. And in the final episode of, I think, season 2, they do an evocation or a ritual to Pan in a cave that plays out in real time. I ended up screening that at a film festival I run here in Eau Claire. But when I initially saw it before I remember watching it in my living room and being very conscious that there was a ritual playing out in real time and turning it off in the middle of it and going, I'll watch it later because I don't want to have this ritual playing in my space. But I wonder if there are filmmakers like that who are probably actually trying to, evoke something in the audience by doing this. But do you ever feel that Hollywood, I know we said it might be difficult, or I said it might be difficult for an entire film crew to realize this, but do you ever think there is an intent to maybe do something ritualistic to affect the audience in these films? Or
Absolutely, no question about it. It's twofold. It's both conscious and subconscious, and the subconscious one, the unknowing, is always the more deadly of the two. But no, there are movies that I have come on other podcasts and said, I believe the devil is in the celluloid. And there are 3 and maybe 4. The first one, that is a incredibly dark movie, and especially from the time frame it was released, is The Black Cat with Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. I mean, this is where the Karloff character, Hjalmar Prolzig, is Aleister Crowley. There's a Crowley analog, and Crowley turns up all over the place in films. But Crowley's influence in Hollywood is much more deadly and lethal, and people aren't aware of it. And then again, this is something I'm going to delve into in my next book. But The Black Cat with Karloff and Lugosi, from when it was released in the early 30s, I mean, this is a movie that deals with necrophilia, satanic conjuration. I mean, it's a very, very dark movie, and it's very ritualistic. I mean, and there's rituals that are latent, and then there's the overt and covert. This one's overt. The covert ones I've always found to be the more sinister, because that's where you can kind of tell this thing is hiding, and doesn't want people to find out about it. And that's what I'm really getting into with the Cinema Symbolism 4 book, that there's a force out there hiding, and it leaves a fingerprint behind. And once you uncover this fingerprint that it's leaving behind, this stuff starts to open up. It's very, very macabre and sinister. But The Black Cat would be one. Of course, number 2 would be The Exorcist. Very, very dark movie. This is a movie that is probably the closest thing you will find to a CIA mind control operation. The guy who wrote it, Blatty, worked for the CIA. This movie it works on a very deep psychological and dark psychological levels, because the whole movie is a shift. It's designed to quell the radicalism of the 1960s embodied by the demon, and make the population submit to the authority of the government and welcome in the decadence of the 1970s, which is represented by the 2 Jesuits. The expulsion of the rowdy demon represents the expulsion of the 1960s by the state, who are the Jesuits, and the suppression of any sort of radicalism of the 1960s. It's meant to extinguish it. That's what the whole Exorcist movie is about. And it's very demonic. It's very mind manipulating. So that's another movie that I would say is very ritualistic in that aspect. And of course, involves the ritual, again, very overt at the end. And the other two movies I think walk hand in hand along this line are the two movies by Ari Aster called Hereditary and Midsommar. These are incredibly bleak and I say very satanic movies. Again, the devil lives in the celluloid in these, where and you have to hear me out. I won't belabor this too long because I know there's more you want to ask me. But the movie Hereditary is about demonic possession, and they use a demon in this from the Lesser Key of Solomon, known as Payman. And it's all about this demon, this very vicious demon named Payman that's being evoked in Hereditary. What makes this very pernicious is if you watch Midsommar, which is the next movie Aster did. I've yet to see Beau is Afraid. I know that's his last one. I haven't seen that yet, so I can't comment on that. But if you watch Midsommar, which is the next movie, this is a movie that it has a Norse setting to it. And if you pay attention to the movie, the number 9 is all over the place in this. And then the number 9 has a lot of meaning in the occult, but in Norse mythology, we're just going to stick to that. It's a very significant meaning in Norse mythology. And that's why Aster's putting it there, at least on its surface. But if you do a little more digging into this, and you watch Hereditary and then you watch Midsommar, these are two very, very dark movies. And again, with Midsommar, you're definitely going to see an influence from The Wicker Man coming into that movie. If you pull out your copy of the Lesser Key of Solomon or Ars Goetia, you'll discover that Payman is the 9th demon in that book. And if you watch Midsommar, the number 9 is just all over the place. I mean, it's plastered from the beginning to the very end of it. And you can't help but believe that this demon is being evoked by these two movies. What makes Midsommar even worse on a supernatural basis is it's a retelling of The Wizard of Oz. And I'm not going to get into this too much, but this is something that I go back to, and this is something I'll be talking about on Tuesday. This is a cursed movie. And this ties into Aleister Crowley, believe it or not. And this is carrying forward a death hex, and one of the worst ones I've ever seen. And anything that relates to this movie or is trying to imitate it is bad news. And I wonder what this means or whatever. But if you watch Midsommar, this is a reinvention of The Wizard of Oz, where you have Dani as the Dorothy character, which is going to this magical land with these 3 adventurers. And she ultimately comes to know herself, which is, of course, the whole idea of Wizard of Oz, is that Dorothy has this Gnostic epiphany at the end, this form of gnosis, where she comes to know herself and realize there's no place like home. This ties into also Alice in Wonderland, by the way, but it's really The Wizard of Oz that's jinxed. But the movies of Aster, those two movies of Aster are very ritualistic and I think are very dark and are in fact conjuring very dark forces.
Wow. I haven't seen Midsommar. I probably should, but I've seen Hereditary, and it is one of the darkest movies I've ever seen. I've seen a lot of dark movies. I think you make clear that The Exorcist then seemed to be effectual in its, perhaps, or may have been effectual because it seems to have been what happened in burying this radicalism of the 60s and bringing in the kind of me generation of the 70s. Do you think our considerable shifts in culture, because the America, let's just say America, but we could say the whole West, the America of today is considerably different to the America of prior to the explosion of the type of the media that we're used to consuming today? Do you think there has been an intention, because I don't think you can argue there's been a change of culture because of what people consume at a popular level, but do you think there's been an intentional change of the culture?
I think it's intentional and unintentional. I think a lot of this right now is coming from a phenomenon, and I don't know how familiar you are with it, called the precession of the equinoxes, which is the sun shifting out of one house where it's been for 2,000 years and entering another house. If you're familiar with this phenomenon, and this is something Aleister Crowley talks about ad nauseum, one of the things I'll just point out is a lot of researchers with Crowley document his life, and then they get into the Thelema stuff a little bit. No one really ever talks about what he's talking about, or reads the Book of the Law, or reads his grimoires and what he is talking about. And when you read it, and when you read it's complex. I'll be the first to admit, I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. It's complex. But what Crowley talked about, and this is coming to fruition, I mean, right now before our very eyes, is 130 years ago, he gets into this thing called the Age of Horus. And if you research this runs parallel with this thing called the Age of Aquarius. And what Crowley is talking about is this phenomenon known as the precession of the equinoxes, where the sun is leaving Pisces behind and going into this new house called Aquarius, where it's going to take up residence for the next 2,000 years. Crowley was informed about this from this supernatural entity in 1904 called AWAS that he seems to have conjured quite inadvertently that talks to him about this. And it's quite phenomenal what he actually says about this, because he actually says some things that help explain this. One of the things he says is, when you're getting involved with this, he says, the Piscean age is Christianity, which he hated. He said, and that's coming to an end. He said, we're going into Aquarius, and this is going to be this new age. And he said, the Christian, Judeo-Christian, Muslim stuff, that's going away. He said, we're going to have this new forms of religion coming up because the sun is now in Aquarius. It's out of Pisces, where it's been for the last 2,000 years. And in the 20th century, we're going to be shifting into Aquarius. And he says two things. And of course, when he was writing this, he didn't have the advent of these words. But one of the things he says is, when this new age is forming in the very early days of this, he said, you're going to see two new religions coming about. He said, and these two new religions are Aquarian age worship. He said, and the first one is called transgenderism. He said, Crowley says, he almost uses that word verbatim. He says, when you see men wanting to be women and women wanting to be men, he said, we are now in Aquarius. He said, and Pisces is over with. He uses words like bisexual, epicene, androgynous, because he didn't have the advent of the word transgenderism. Bear in mind, he's writing this 120 years ago. So, and he said, this is what this demon is telling me, this AWAS demon. He said, and there's another thing that's coming out. He said, and this is going to be in the early days of Aquarius. He said, I don't know what this means. He said, it might have something to do with conflict or anything. He said, but there's going to be a group of people worrying about the weather changing. He said it's climate change, or it looks like something like that. The words he uses are people worried about the world being on fire or the world heating up. And he says, when you see these two things emerging, you know that we are out of Pisces and into Aquarius. And then he goes on to give some hallmarkers as to some road signs, as to things that to look for, as to when this is going to be happening. And it's one of the most amazing and astounding things that I've ever looked into. And I'm actually, like I said, it's almost one of those things where maybe I'm kind of almost like where I wish I hadn't discovered this almost, because it's without question one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen or analyzed. And again, this is going to be one of the main things in my new book that's coming out.
This is going to sound a little paranoid, but do you ever worry that if you get close to that kind of level truth, that there's any repercussions for you? Or
it's funny you mention that, because like I said to you, so looking at some of this material, it's very seldom anymore that I get the oh my God, what makes me step back and think, surprises me anymore. This material does. And I will say this to you, there is an element for me that is a little scary. It's the first time in my life that I've actually been a little afraid of this information, because I've never seen anything like this before. It's definitely disturbing. I'll put it to you like that, because the one thing that makes this so unnerving is it's not open to speculation. This thing operates with numeric sequences, and when you pick up on the numeric sequences, they all hit. And when you know what to look for, I'll put it to you like this, or exactly what it looks like. It's like finding a fingerprint. The fingerprint is unique and it can't be anybody else's. And this thing that is doing this is leaving its fingerprints behind in numbers. And when you decode this numeric sequence, it's astounding. It's just astounding how this thing operates. And it's just a numeric sequence that just boom, 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 just keeps falling. And you'll find this numeric sequence, these fingerprints going back to the early 20th century over every catastrophe, and every sort of major event that you can really think about, and especially as you get closer to, the turn of the millennium, this thing just seems to be, going into hyperactive mode, as it were.
Now, you certainly don't position yourself as a prophet or somebody who can predict anything, and I don't of myself either. But are there any trends you're seeing in culture now that you suspect might manifest in some way because of their presentation today, in the future, going forward?
Yeah, I would say, to keep an eye out for, I don't think the stuff with transgenderism and climate change is going away anytime soon. In fact, this seems to be in its very early developments right now. I would say keep an eye out, again, for any. I mean, the thing that seems to be happening is any sort of catastrophe, mass shootings, school shootings. These seem to be all tied together to me. I can link this thing that Crowley's talking about to 9/11. It goes back to the Kennedy assassination. You can find these fingerprints all over that. You can find it, believe it or not, in the weather with some of the hurricanes. It's very destructive right now. What I would say is, even in scripture. So let's just leave the world of the occult behind. Even in scripture, when you read about these changeovers from age to age in the early days of it, it's the word that's always used is birthing pains. That the world will go through some birthing pains, and that's, to me, sort of, I think, what we're experiencing right now. And I don't know if it's ever going to go back to the way it was. I don't think it will. But that's kind of it seems to me right now that we're in still the early days of this. I could be wrong on that, but it seems that this is going to probably start escalating, probably in the next 50 to 100 years. That would be my best estimation.
No, I suspect there's some kind of quickening, like Art Bell used to talk about as well. Everything seems to be speeding up too. Why don't we leave it on just one final question to go away from the darker space we're in. This has been fascinating, and I never heard about it before. But that's Trump's link to Tesla technology and the potential of maybe time travel being involved in some of this. I was just staggered when I read that. I was like, I never heard this before.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. When I write my books, I do my best to keep them apolitical, of course, unless something has a political, thing in it. But there is a theory out there, and it's not as far-fetched as it sounds, that the Trump family has access to time travel. And believe it or not, it was Trump's uncle John Trump, who analyzed all of Nikola Tesla's time travel experiments. There is some very unique numerology and numbers that appear around Trump. And what's funny about Trump is the numbers are actually the inversion of the Crowley numbers. So 9/11 with Trump becomes 11/9. You will find that number with Trump, like, for example, if you watch the Serta mattress commercial, the two numbers 11/9 appear in the background, which is an inversion of 9/11. And then you get the night of the election in 16, he won on November 9th, which is, again, the inversion of 9/11. And then there was a movie that came out in the early 90s called Gremlins 2, where John Glover played the Donald Trump analog. I think his name was Daniel Clamp. And there's a scene at it towards the end where he gets interviewed by the news media, and the two numbers on the microphones are 11/9. So with Trump, you get the inversion of the Crowley numbers, which is very, very peculiar. But yeah, with Trump, there's always been this sneaking suspicion with him that, he might have access to some sort of time travel manipulation. And this ties into the Ingersoll Rand book, which is, again, another one of these astounding, coincidences, or whatever you want to call it, from the late 19th, early 20th century. I think it's called The Adventures of Little Baron Trump. And if you look at this, it's just that. It's the adventures of this little boy. I think he winds up going to Russia, and he meets someone called the Donald, or something to that effect. I have it in the third book, more laid out. I haven't talked about it in a while. But when if you pay attention to it, I think, I remember that if you look at the drawing of little Donald or little Baron Trump, and then you compare it to the real Baron Trump, it's identical. I mean, it looks just like the kid. So very fascinating there. And again, this is one of those, odd sort of things where, it makes you wonder, what's going on with this synchronicity. Is this supernatural? Is this some sort of synthesis? Is this, humankind? Is this time travel? Is this some sort of prophecy? Again, I don't have all the answers. I can document it, but it's just one of those things that very fascinating. And, I think we have yet to kind of uncover what is causing this. My gut feeling is it's probably some sort of synthesis, but, that'd be my best estimation right now.
What I've read of your book, mainly Cinema Symbolism 3, is just absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to read all of your books. I can't wait to see the teaser drop, which is going to happen on Tuesday that you mentioned on your website. How do people get a hold of your books and see what you're up to?
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you, Dean, for having me on Talking Weird. It's been my pleasure to be here. My name is my website. It's RobertWSullivanIV. My name is Robert W. Sullivan IV. So my website is RobertWSullivanIV.com. There's information there about me, links to purchase the books. The books are available on all the major online retailers, whether it be Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. They're all in print and ebook form. The only one that is not in ebook right now is the Pact with the Devil book that was just re-released. There's a couple reasons why that is not in ebook form right now. I won't get into it, but the ebook will be coming. It'll probably been pushed up. I originally said summer, probably more into the fall at this point, but that will come. But you can buy all the books on all the major retailers. There's links on my website to buy the books. There's a blog that's constantly being updated. There's all the new interviews, such as this podcast, that'll go up there. So go to the website, www.robertwsullivanIV.com. Information about me, information about buying the books, information about upcoming shows I'm going to do. The preface to Cinema Symbolism 4 should drop on, hopefully, I don't see why I won't, unless I'm limited in words or images or something like that. Then it may have to go in 2 or 3 posts. We'll see. That should go up on Tuesday the 1st. I should point out that Cinema Symbolism 4 is still over a year away. One of the movies that I'm waiting to analyze, and that is the Joker 2 movie with Lady Gaga and Joaquin Phoenix. The first Joker movie is a movie I took on in CS3 that is a highly alchemical movie. And by all accounts, even from the preview of what I've seen with this new one, this looks overloaded with stuff. So I'm going to wait till I see Joker 2, and that I think is not due out till October 24. So the Cinema Symbolism 4 is still away, but I want to present this preface, just because I think the information in it is very, very potent and powerful. And as a lawyer, I would have no problem presenting it to a judge or jury. And again, I don't want to sound too much of a downer, but it is probably without question some of the most disturbing, if not fascinating, material that I've ever examined.
Well, thank you so much, Robert. You're just an absolute wealth of knowledge, and your cinematic analysis is frankly staggering. I loved it so much what I read. But until I talk to you next, and I'd love to have you back on, until I talk to everybody else out there, keep it weird.
Thank you.